start with the introduction of the model. Okay.
All right, well, we are group 5, and we're presenting the case study A, which is the fixing or diagnosing the problem and recreating the humanoid robot so that it performs the function and is beneficial to society the way that the Institute of Japan that we're working on it is.
I was just talking about the group and yourselves.
Just ourselves? Oh, okay.
Well, what group number and then who's who?
Group 5, I'm David.
Mark.
That's Benson.
And we're doing like a little skit type presentation. You guys think about it?
Yeah.
Are you ready? Alright. Hello gentlemen, my name is Mark and I am the director of the Advanced Institute of Japan. I've actually requested your assistance here on a matter that I cannot seem to figure out. We have been working diligently on a humanoid robot project that simulates the actions of human movement. And in the first level of testing among elementary schools, we have run into the problem of children being frightened because of what we believe to be the lack of true human movement. This robot was also designed to assist in and possibly take over certain jobs in which humans lack the desire to do. An example of a job would include long drives in an 18-wheeler truck, and this robot primarily would not get sleepy and it would not stop for any food. So this would increase the speed of deliveries and decrease the amount of accidents caused by an exhausted human driver. Unfortunately, our robot is not suitable for any type of job and cannot be approved to be up for sale. The main reason being due to the lack of fluidity in movement and its ability to truly mimic the way humans move. So using that job as a truck driver or like bomb disposal, jobs like that, the robot is unable to like steer the wheel smoothly or like handle the bomb smoothly. So if you move in like jerks like robot does, you know, they'll probably blow up. And instead, it moves in, like I said, in sudden jerks. And of course, this is dangerous, and it will risk the lives of many humans near it. I trust your knowledge and expertise to help me diagnose this problem, and I would like you guys to help me create the perfect human robot that will enter the human world flawlessly, conquering numerous jobs around this world.
Alright, plug that in, and we'll have a presentation here that hopefully will help in that endeavor. Technical difficulties.
This is why we bring our jokes. Anybody have a joke?
Not that one.
Before we start, we can I guess
How do you keep your blonde spouse at home? Can I do blonde jokes? Sorry. How do you keep your blonde spouse at home? Circular driveway. Sorry.
Scroll down. I'll try it. Okay.
Anybody else got one?
I got two bacteria walking into a bar, and the security guard stops and says, "Hey, you guys can't come in here. You're not allowed." And they say, "Oh no, it's okay. We're staff."
That was the classic 3 bacteria going to the bar joke.
I'll just look at me.
Alright, so our presentation is called Wall-E 2.0. We're going to take your old robot that is incapable of performing very sophisticated tasks and can only perform little movements here, and we're going to transform it into a Wall-E 2.0, a more human robot that can accomplish these tasks. So first, we're going to look at the questions that need to be asked. What is the problem with this robot? Simply, we believe it's the simplicity of the robot. And we are not robotic engineers, so you would only know the answer to this part. But from what we see in how the robot moves, we feel that the robot has almost entirely made up of hinges. which doesn't allow it to move in its fluid motion. So, does the robot have hinges? Does the robot have fluid and human movement? The answer to that is no. I think there's too much simplicity in the joint movement. So basically what we're going to do today is we're going to start with the arm, and we're going to make our way through the joints of the arm and explain how those joints work so that you can take that knowledge back to your engineers and have them recreate robotics to make that joint the way it's supposed to so that it moves more human-like. So the first one we're going to start with is the shoulder joint or the glenohumeral joint. It is the most mobile joint. It is a ball and socket joint, and it moves in abduction, adduction, rotation, front and back flexion or extension, and 360 degrees in the sagittal plane. Because it's ball and socket, the ball sits like it gets that total around movement as opposed to a series of hinges which require movements like that. Anatomically, it's made up of 3 bones: the clavicle, the scapula, and the humerus. Next one. The different muscles, there's a lot of muscles that move the shoulder, but just for simplicity reasons and not getting too much of an anatomy lesson, some of the main muscles are your deltoids. There's an anterior, a posterior, and a lateral deltoid, and that is where you're going to get your flexion, abduction. And then you have your trapezius, which is depression, elevation, and adduction. And I wanted to touch on the rotator cuffs a little bit because those add a lot of support to the muscle joint. You have your supraspinatus, which is the first 15 degrees of flexion. Your infraspinatus, which is outward rotation. The teres minor, that works a lot with infraspinatus. Similar movements, transverse abduction, transverse extension. And the subscapularis, internal rotation, forward, downward movement. I want to touch on those just because they are supporters, and when you're trying to get a real fluid motion in the shoulder joint, it's important to know all the different elements that make up that shoulder so that it can move in each of those individual degrees in a fluid motion.
Okay, to get more fluid motion for more human-like movement for the robot at this point, I think it would be best to talk about the elbow joints. The humeral radial, the ball and socket joint, humeral ulnar, which is just basically a simple hinge to work with, and a superior radial ulnar or a pivot joint per se would help to give more of that fluid motion, especially with the driving and things like that later. Humeral radial is limited to just ball and socket.
Actually, it's not. The humeral radial is the capitulum of the humerus articulating with the radial head. It's not a ball and socket joint. It's actually it's the proximal humeral ulnar joint is only allowing that trochoid or pivot type motion. It's not allowing for the multi-axial ball and socket motion. So it's incorrect to call it the ball and socket. Okay?
Incorrect that if it's limited, because that's a lot of the research.
I do see what you're saying about limited, but it's really only allowing for the pivot, and so I think it's more accurate to say it's a trochoid joint.
Synovial joint is a spherical joint prevents separation laterally, and it supports at this point. Superior radial ulnar is a trochoid pivot joint. Ankylosis allows for supination and pronation.
Nice.
Wrist joint, radiocarpal, has 8 bones, ellipsoid joint, articulations, radiocarpal, intercarpal, and midcarpal, carpal, mediacarpal, and intermediacarpal. Intercommunicate through common synovial activity, basically with all the movements from our elbow and all the way down to get our movements kind of like we work together, and it hopes to initially working maybe with bombs and stuff like that, so we're able to get that free range of motion and maybe more people. Okay. Wrist joint and muscles and movement. The 20 forearm muscles responsible for the movement in the wrist and hand radial abduction, ulnar adduction, extension, ulnar flexion.
Okay.
Very essential. It is kind of leads back to what I was talking about with the elbow and wrist and how they work together.
Good.
Between the joints and muscles.
All right, now we're down to the hand and the fingers. So for the hand, extrinsic flexors and extensions. That's an open and closing hand. Very important here for the robot to be able to grab and handle things. One note on that I wanted to touch base on, we were noticing in the video of the robot, the hands tended to be very flexible, extended open in a relaxed state, which makes it look very, very human-like, because the hand naturally, when completely relaxed, has that slight flexion to it, that cupness in the hands. So that's one thing to consider when looking at the hands. There's also intrinsic muscles that are in the thumb, bring the hands together. Okay. All right, looking at the fingers, there's abduction, adduction, circumduction, flexion, and extension within the finger joints. There's first the metacarpal phalangeal, which is the condyloid hinge joint, and that's going to be at the knuckle. So because it's condyloid, you're going to have that multiple amount of movement. That's going to be your abduction, adduction, circumduction, and so on. Then you have your interphalangeal muscles, and these are your hinge joints. The PFE as a picture, PFE being distal, PFE being the proximal, and those are the different hinges in the fingers. We need to make sure we get all 3 of these different hinges in the fingers so that you can completely grab around any object that you're trying to grab.
Good.
Lastly, the thumb. The thumb is very, very important in the hand. It really what makes the human human, and its ability to do a lot of activities. So it's also called the trapeziometacarpal joint, and it's a saddle joint, biaxial movement in the sagittal and frontal planes. It is a condyloid in its movement, so it also does the abduction, adduction, flexion, extension, and circumduction. So that concludes the arm for today. Hopefully that's helpful, and you can go back to your engineers and try to incorporate some of these different joints into the arm of the robot, and maybe we can start moving forward from there.
Perfect. Thank you. We'll discuss your guys' salary.
And that's